inaasam, kasipagan ng sagot, salat ka man sa kayamanan. Buksan ang pahina ng mga aklat ng karunungan, edukasyon ating kailangan, kamamangan ating iwanan. Peace! Ating lilipanin, ating pagpawin, ating tanawin. Bagong pag-asa ay muling tatanawin. Kinabukasan pag-ibayin. Pilitin mong gawin. Gusto ang pagsisika. Pag-asa ay yakapin. Edukasyon ang kayamanan ng kahit ninuman. Isang pangarap ang tutupad. Pagsisikapan ng lahat. Gusto ang pagsisika. Kaya mo yun, kaibigan. Mabubuo isang pangarap.
The COVID-19 pandemic has brought unprecedented changes to our usual ways of living. But the Department of Education remains unfazed by these challenges to fulfill the mission of Sulong Edukalidad, the rallying call for national effort to deliver quality basic education to all Filipinos, which involve aggressive reforms in the 4 key areas: the K-12 curriculum review and update, improving the learning environment, teachers upskilling and reskilling, and engagement of stakeholders for support and collaboration to move forward together as we prepare the education system for the future. The call for Sulong Edukalidad will continue, and we have built the framework of the Basic Education Learning Continuity Plan, or the BELCP, to put the needs of the learners at top priority. DepEd's BELCP is the major response and commitment to protect the health, safety, and well-being of learners, teachers, and personnel. The plan aims to provide opportunities to continue education even in these trying times with a BELCP in place, supported by an unprecedented number of diverse stakeholders from the academe, media, industry groups, NGOs, business and private individuals. Sulong Edukalidad will be able to sustain the aims in its reform for quality basic education. In our journey towards quality education, we have established the 4 pillars of aggressive reforms from the start, and we have been continuing to progress in these pillars. In improving the learning environment, we took action in the construction and rehabilitation of school buildings, ensured the availability of learning materials and equipment, and prioritized our last mile schools. The challenges of the pandemic also brought to light the urgent need to upgrade our ICT infrastructure to service the needs of education. In terms of the teachers upskilling and reskilling, we were able to establish more innovative professional standards for teachers and school heads. We have aligned the professional development of teachers with their career progression to track their development as part of the National Educators Academy of the Philippines transformation. With the launch of the Education Futures program, where we will be focusing on innovative actions and solutions to improve the state of our education, we are now more than ready to start a new journey and continue our fight for quality education for all Filipino learners. Finally, we've given high importance to the engagement of stakeholders for support and collaboration. In support of this, we have convened the Philippine Forum for Accessible Quality Basic Education, or the Education Forum, which will leverage other partnerships for education quality and strengthen partnership with the Philippine Normal University as the country's national center for teacher education. The department has also been developing a professional development program for teachers and school leaders in order to equip them with the skills, materials, and data that will allow them to help their students prepare for PISA 2022. This intervention consists of the following components: online training for teachers and school leaders, development of learning materials and practice tests for students, deepening the analysis of the PISA 2018 results, and supporting school-level action research. Now that the year is about to end, our commitment to sulong edukalidad will continue and will be far from being gone. With a lot at stake, considering our new knowledge and experience from this year's challenges, we are equipped to face a new future. As we head on to the future where we will face many challenges and uncertainties, the department will always be the guardian of every Filipino learner's right to education.
Sino ba ang hindi naapektuhan? Sino ba ang hindi nag-alala? Sino ba ang hindi nalito? Lahat tayo ay naapektuhan. Lahat tayo ay nag-aalala. Lahat tayo ay nalito. Dahil binago ng pandemyang dulot ng COVID-19 ang paraan ng pamumuhay ng lahat ng mga Pilipino saan mang sektor ka nabibilang. Tumigil ang panandalian ang ating mga nakagawian. Tumigil ang lahat ng uri ng transaksyon. Tumigil ang lahat ng operasyon ng mga paaralan. Nakalilito. Nakakaba. Paano na ang kinabukasan ng mga kabataan? Paano na tayo sa hinaharap? Opisyal na nilulunsad ng Kagawaran ng Edukasyon sa pangunguna ng Office of the Undersecretary for Curriculum and Instruction ang DepEd Teaches. Ito ay isang online na programa na gagabay sa mga guro, tagapangasiwa, magulang at mag-aaral hinggil sa mga pagbabago sa batayang edukasyon ngayong new normal. Ang DepEd Teaches ay angkla sa sulong edukalidad na nakatuon sa apat na pangunahing pangangailangan ng mapunyaging reforma tungo sa makalidad na pagtuturo at pagkatuto. Una, pagre-review at pagsasapanahon ng kurikulum ng K-12. Ikalawa, pagpapaunlad ng kapaligirang pampagkatuto. Ikatlo, paglinang ng mga bagong kasanayan sa mga guro. At ang ikaapat, ang pakikipag-ugnay sa mga stakeholder para sa suporta at kolaborasyon. Sa pamamagitan ng virtual learning platform, ang DepEd Teaches ang magsisilbing bukas na komunidad ng pagsasanay na titipon sa mga guro, tagapamunong pang-edukasyon at sa sinumang may pagnanais sa pagtataguyod ng kalidad na edukasyon sa bansa at sa pagtagumpay ng bawat Pilipinong mag-aaral. Ang mga opisyal, education specialist, learning content expert at outstanding teacher ng DepEd ang magiging tagapanayam na magbabahagi ng kanilang kaalaman at kasanayan sa kurikulum, pagtuturo at pagkatuto, pagtataya at lahat ng kaugnay na mahalaga sa proseso ng pagtuturo at pagkatuto sa new normal. Bilang mga frontliner ng classroom, inaasahang magiging aktibo ang mga guro sa programang ito. Ang mga tema at paksa ay angkop sa kanilang pangangailangan at konteksto sa pamamagitan ng accessible na platform, ang social media. Sumali na sa OUCI family sa DepEd Teaches kung sama-sama mapahuhusay pa ang mga guro, kung sama-sama higit na malilinang natin ang mga mag-aaral.
Hardened by the test of times, Leung and IB High School continues to embark on adjusted learning modalities to better serve the children of the 7 tribes widely spread throughout the indigenous cultural communities of the province of Bukidnon. School learning modules are distributed and retrieved right at their doorsteps of the cultural communities. The school takes pride of being part of the learning journey of the students despite of the many challenges and obstacles met along the way.
We deliver the modules twice a month in the respective communities in all parts of Bukidnon. The travel is not easy, yet fulfilling, to see the interests of our students to learn, despite our situation today.
The teachers stay 2 to 3 days in the community during visits to attend to the difficulties of the students, especially the struggling learners.
We meet our students anywhere to cater and entertain their queries as regard the lessons.
Students with easy access to school or whose community is within the school proximity pick up and return their modules regularly. To enforce the learning of the students, the school mobilizes the community tutors who are capable of helping the learners, like some tribal elders and leaders and other senior students. The teachers also entertain queries of students via mobile phones, though only a few have access to this technology. To supplement the learning and SLMS, the radio-based instruction was also advocated by employing the neighborhood or community-based strategy. Students are clustered and provided with transistor radios to catch up the radio lessons.
Naminaw mi sa radyo, samtang gagawin na mo ang aming module, kauban sa akong mga silingan, aron masaktan ang gidang pag-ayo ng aming mga leksyon.
Secretary Brunius once told, education must continue. And Leungan IP High School responds by saying, and shall continue to uphold our noble battle cry of transforming lives, preserving culture.
Naranasan ko ng maiwan. Hindi ko na mabilang kung ilang beses akong nakiusap hanggang sa maubos ang pangungusap. Naisip ko na ring sumuko dahil sa sunod-sunod na bagyo. Parang walang katapusan itong kalbaryo. Saan nga ba ako patungo? Saan ba ang dulo nito? Sa paglalakbay, muntik na akong huminto. Pero sinalubong mo ko. Bumungad sa akin yung mga mata mong gustong matuto. Ang mga kamay mong sabik sumulat. Ang mga labi mong nais bumigkas ng mga salitang nakakapawi ng pagod. Tinatalo mo itong lungkot at takot. Binibigyan mo ng sagot ang mga katanungan sa aking puso.
Masampat, abi-abi, mga anak?
Masampat pala, abi-abi, mo.
Na sa dami ng alinlangan ko't tanong sa mundo, ito ang nag-iisang sigurado. Mahal ko ang pagtuturo. Ito ang nagbibigay buhay sa aking pagkatao. At ang mga pangarap nila, ang aking ligaya. Minsan na rin akong naiwan. Kaya't sisikapin kong hindi mo ito maranasan.
How do we provide a culture-based education?
How do we develop cultural sensitivity?
How do we ensure equality and access to all Filipinos?
What does inclusive education really mean for us Filipinos in a multicultural society?
To discover the answers to these questions, we gladly offer to you another meaningful presentation here on DepEd Teaches episode 38, Hindsight, Insight, and Foresight, Lessons and Ways Forward in Indigenous Peoples Education. Good afternoon to all, and thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to watch and support DepEd Teaches in all our different channels, the DepEd Philippines Facebook page, DepEd Tayo, DepEd YouTube channel, and of course, don't forget to like, follow, and share our official Facebook page, the DepEd Teaches. In today's episode, we will talk about the programs and milestones of the Indigenous Education Program and its contribution to inclusive education. As we all know, part of DepEd's vision is to strengthen participation, inclusion, and empowerment among our IP communities. Good afternoon to you, Ma'am Ana. What other things do we expect in today's presentation?
Pleasant afternoon, everyone. Hello, Sir July. So to answer your question, well, aside from the pre-pandemic milestones of Indigenous Peoples Education Program, we will also find out the current situation and challenges encountered of our IP community since last year due to pandemic. I'm sure our dear viewers are very curious as to how diverse the learning modalities that are being employed, including the contextualization of lesson plans and provisions of other psychosocial support materials to our IP communities. Remember, here in the Department of Education, we have the Indigenous Peoples Education Program that addresses that basic education is an essential means for Indigenous cultural community to claim their rights, exercise self-determination, and expand the choices available to them.
That's very true, Ma'am Ana. And to add to that, the Indigenous Peoples' Right Act of 1997, which emanated from our constitutional provision on the recognition and protection of the rights of indigenous cultural communities, mandates the state to provide equal access to various cultural opportunities to the indigenous people. And this is what IPED program all about. It supports the realization of the K-12 basic education curriculum, which subscribes to the following standards: inclusive, culture-based, and flexible enough to enable and allow the schools to localize, indigenize, and enhance the curriculum based on the community's educational and social context. But before we dive deep into our discussion today, we will have again another short activity. This time, it will be a form of checking your prior knowledge as our viewers. We will ask you 4 questions related to Indigenous Peoples Education. But do not worry, we will be providing you some clues through configuration, and we will give you 30 seconds for you to type in your answer in our comment section. So again, we will ask you 4 concepts or ideas related to Indigenous Peoples Education, and you just need to tell us what the concept or idea based on the configuration of letters in the word as our clue. Okay, so I hope that is clear, and I hope everyone's ready now. So just relax and enjoy this short game. So Miss Anna, please take it away.
All right, so let's begin. Please show question number 1. This degree of contextualization refers to the process of relating learning content specified in the curriculum to local information and materials in the learner's community. What do you think is the correct answer? Please key in your answer now in the comment section. Alright, so let's find out the correct answer. So the correct answer is localization. So this refers to the degree of contextualization. It's the process of relating learning content specified in the curriculum to local information and materials in the learner's community. Localization. So if there is localization in business, Sir July, there is also localization in education. And when we talk about localization, this involves making the local culture an integral part of the curriculum. Hence, through the localization of the curriculum, it can allow learning to become more relevant and meaningful to our learners.
I agree, Ma'am Ana. And here in the department, localization is a buzzword. We've been doing a lot of producing learning resources containing localized curricular contents or concepts. All right, then now for our next question, we can now show them on the screen. This degree of contextualization is described as the process of enhancing curriculum competencies, education resources, and teaching and learning processes in relation to the geobiographical, historical, and socio-cultural context of the learner's community. Okay, so the clue is provided based on the configuration of the letters as shown. So please key in now the answer for 30 seconds. All right. I hope we have you have key in now the correct answer. We can now show them. The answer here is indigenization. Okay, so when we say indigenization, this is the degree of contextualization as described in our enhanced curriculum, the competencies, education resources, the teaching and learning process in relation to the geobiographical, historical, sociocultural context of our learners' community. And so by practicing indigenized ways of knowing, learning, teaching, instructing, and even training, it ensures that students and teachers are able to benefit from education in a culturally sensitive manner that utilizes, promotes, and enhances awareness of indigenous traditions.
Sounds good, Sir July. We become culturally sensitive when we do this varying degrees of contextualization. And these are localization and indigenization. Okay, so for the next question. So for the third question, this is a development framework that highlights the recognition, promotion, and protection of rights as a basis for all development initiatives. Again, this is a development framework that highlights the recognition, promotion, and protection of rights as a basis for all development initiatives. You have 30 seconds to give the correct answer. Okay, so let's find out. What is this development framework that highlights the recognition, promotion, and protection of rights? The correct answer is, from the question itself, you will find the clue, rights-based approach. When we talk about rights-based approach, it focuses on people empowerment through the introduction and use of the concept of rights as legal entitlements of the people and legal obligations of the government to its people. So the National Indigenous Peoples Education Policy Framework subscribes to this approach. Hence, this program is undertaken because Indigenous communities have the right to an education that is appropriate to their culture, aspirations, and needs.
That's good to hear and to share to our viewers, Ma'am Ana. Rights-based approach of teaching emphasizing our human rights. All right, for our last question for this episode, please flash now on the screen. These are the recognized elders in the community and are acknowledged repositories of their people's history, practices, beliefs, and knowledge system, having faithfully and truthfully practiced this as taught to them by their own elders. Okay, the clue to you are provided, or the clue is provided to you with the configuration of letters as shown. So key in now the answer for 30 seconds. All right. I hope our viewers now have all key in their answer. So the answer that we are looking for here, what do you call to these recognized elders in the community who are also acknowledged repositories of the history, practices, and beliefs, and even the knowledge system of the community, having being taught to them by their own elders? So this is called, or they are called, culture bearers. So when we say culture bearers, just like our indigenous knowledge system and practices, or the IKSP holder, they play a crucial role in the successful implementation of the IPED program. We involve them in planning, designing, and even in the execution of our programs and activities. In fact, we even tap them as our co-facilitators in the teaching and learning process. All right, so we now move, or we have reviewed some of the key terms related to our understanding of Indigenous peoples education. So this time, we will meet now our resource person who leads the office in the implementation of the programs, projects, and activities in relation to what we are talking about, the Indigenous peoples education.
Miss Maria Lourie Victor hails from Benguet Province and is of Kankanae and Visayan parentage. She was involved in community-based education initiatives for Indigenous cultural communities since 1998, providing technical assistance to requesting communities in developing innovations to the various dimensions of culture-based education in the context of IP communities. From 2004 to 2011, she served as a staff of the Episcopal Commission on Indigenous Peoples Catholic Bishops Conference of the Philippines, particularly the Commission's Indigenous Peoples Education Program, that was tasked with assisting and strengthening the national network of IP education practitioners who are partners of dioceses and congregations.
In 2011, Miss Victor was invited to be part of the technical assistance team to support the Department of Education in implementing the Philippines' response to Indigenous Peoples and Muslim Education, or the PRIME program, whose goal was to increase institutional awareness and responsiveness to the needs and concerns of our Indigenous and Muslim learners. Her first 2 years in the program was with the DepEd Cordillera Administrative Region, or CAR. With the commencement of DepEd's Indigenous Peoples Education Program in 2013, Ms. Victor was requested to provide technical assistance to the Indigenous Peoples Education Office, or the IPSEO, as the consultant. She is currently a senior technical assistant serving as the head of this office. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the current Senior Technical Assistant and serving as the head of the Indigenous Peoples Education Office in DepEd Central Office. Let's all give a virtual round of applause to Ms. Maria Lourie C. Victor.
Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat at sa lahat ng tagapanood ng DepEd Teaches. Thank you very much, Ma'am Ana, Sir July, for preparing us and warming us up for the sharing this afternoon on the first decade of the Indigenous Peoples Education Program, our taking stock and moving onward. For us to appreciate the Indigenous Peoples Education Program, it will be necessary for us to have a short historical background. And that will mean having a brief understanding of the history of exclusion experienced by IP communities, particularly in the education arena. According to the stories and sharings of several generations of IP community members, schooling has not been an easy experience. In many cases, schooling has been a venue for discrimination, experienced with teachers, classmates, even through the teaching methods, the evaluation tools, and how the school has been managed. The school has also been an experience of what we call non-being. In other words, the community's context, the culture, for example, is absent and in some cases misrepresented or misunderstood. If it is tackled in school, there is a tendency to communicate it as something that is backward or invalid. Also, lessons tend not to address the community's context. If there are cases where culture is discussed, it tends to be what we call surface culture, or the more easily interpreted understanding of culture, like songs, clothes, food. Unfortunately, even with good intentions, this can sometimes lead to a shallow understanding of Indigenous peoples as peoples and culture as a process. The impact of this on IP learners would include their difficulty in learning the needed competencies. So when the lessons are not tackled in a context that they understand, it is difficult for them to understand the concepts. And sometimes this can lead to discouragement. The discrimination alone experienced tends to reduce the desire to continue schooling, and therefore they drop out before the school ends. There is also a tendency for IP learners to lose the respect for their culture and heritage because of the bombardment of discriminatory views. It can lead also to low self-esteem, sense of shame, and a loss of IP identity. In cases when the learners are able to go through the education system, it has been observed that they tend to be focused on their own success. And in some cases, as some community representatives have shared, those who are able to study can be a cause of community disunity. Sabi nga ng ilang matatanda, kung sino pa daw ang nakapag-aral, siya pa ang nanloloko sa kapwa niya katutubo. Despite these painful experiences, these difficult challenges faced by our indigenous communities on various fronts, they continued to assert for their rights and their dignity as peoples. So that in 1987, our Philippine Constitution recognized indigenous cultural communities in the Philippines. 10 years later, this recognition was elaborated more by the Indigenous Peoples Rights Act, which included provisions on education. Another 10 years later, in 2007, the United Nations ratified the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, this time at the global level. These developments through the decades paved the way for this more inclusive understanding, such that in the arena of education, we were now moving towards inclusion, including the worldview, the dignity, and the recognition of indigenous peoples. For the department, the journey of having a policy took 2 years, and this was during the height of the basic education sector reform agenda, where indigenous peoples education was an identified major agenda for focus. So it took 2 years from 2008 to 2010 to consult IP communities nationwide and be able to come up with substantial material so that it would now translate into a DepEd order, which came out in 2011, DepEd Order 62. This was a product of the dialogue of DepEd and IT communities trying to find common ground so that the advocacy for what is now called Indigenous Peoples Education could move forward. So in the national advocacy for Indigenous Peoples Education, DO 62 is indeed a historical moment. It is the national policy that provides a framework for what we call IP education, and it mandates the department to develop and implement an Indigenous Peoples Education program. Let us listen to a short video, also produced by the department, that helps to provide an overview about the IPED program and how it contributes to inclusive education.
The IPED program is DepEd's response to the right of indigenous communities and indigenous learners to an education that is responsive to their context, it respects their identities, and it values and promotes their knowledge systems, their competencies, and the values that are important to them, and of course the other parts of their heritage.
Katutubong panawagan nila ay magkaroon ng isang katutubong edukasyon na nakapaloob yung kanilang kultura, lengguwahe, indigenous learning system, indigenous knowledge system and practices. Kinakailangan malaman din nila kung anong meron sa labas ng kanilang komunidad. Sa DepEd, ito po yung ating sinasabing contextualization. Mamuhay sila sa kanilang komunidad, kaya nilang mamuhay sa kanilang sariling konteksto na hindi sila mamumulubi, na hindi sila manlilimos. Lalabas sila sa kanilang komunidad, kaya pa rin nilang makisabay sa labas ng kanilang komunidad, sa lipunan, sa kabuuang lipunan na kanilang kinagagalawan.
So first, we recognize the governance systems, the leadership of their community elders and leaders, and we work closely with them. We engage them in the process of designing our activities and our programs. Sinisigurado natin na ang kanilang pananaw at ang kanilang mga ninanais, yung kanilang aspirations, ay nagiging gabay sa mga plano natin sa IP education at the national and at the local level. Pangalawa, gusto natin na ang kaalaman at karunungan ng mga katutubong pamayanan ay maging bahagi ng ating national curriculum. Pangatlo, kinikilala din natin ang halaga ng katutubong sistema ng pagtuturo at pagkatuto. Another way by which we promote inclusive education is by recognizing the diversity of cultural identities. Especially today, we are more conscious that no learner should be discriminated upon or no learner should feel excluded because of his or her identity, cultural identity. Kung titignan natin yung ginagawa sa DepEd, ang ating pakikiisa at pakikituwang sa ating mga katutubong pamayanan ay isang paraan upang maramdaman ng ating mga IP communities o ng ating mga katutubong pamayanan na kaisa sila sa bansang Pilipinas. Mararamdaman nila na kinikilala ang kanilang mga kakayahan at ang kanilang karapatan na magdesisyon tungkol sa kanilang kinabukasan. Another way by which we contribute nationally is by listening to the stories of indigenous communities, because the memories of indigenous communities go way back to the times before colonization. They could share stories, they could share wisdom, anecdotes. They can help us understand how our ancestors related and valued ways of living, which are applicable until today. Ang isa pang paraan kung paano ang DepEd program ay nakakaambag sa mas malawak na lipunan ay sa pamamagitan ng pagpapayaman ng ating pambansang curriculum. Our national curriculum will be enriched by the local knowledge systems that our IP communities are contributing or will be contributing to the national curriculum through the contextualized lessons that will be happening at the school level with our IP learners.
Ito naman po ninyo ang DepEd ay patuloy na umuunlad at nakikita ko naman sa loob ng 3 taon na pagiging school head ko dito sa Sitio Target Integrated School. Nakita ko ang malaking pagbabago pero hindi nila sinakripisyo ang kanilang kulturang nakagistan bagkos lalo nila itong embrace at inangkla dito sa K-12 curriculum.
Marami din po naitulong ang DepEd sa DepEd. Kasi po, marami po nagbago. Tulad na nga lang mo sa paano po kami makisalamuha sa mga unat. Unat po kasi tawag namin mga straight ang buhok. Ayun, yung pong mga pakikisalamuha po namin sa kanila, at unti-unti na po nagkakaroon ng komunikasyon sa bawat isa dahil po dyan sa DepEd Education.
Sa pamamagitan po ng ating IP Education, ang dami na po naging successful. Sa mga naging estudyante ko lang dito, ma'am. Sa mga naga po na matuto sila, hindi lamang po yung pangkultura, kung ano yung nasa baba, kaya din nila.
Kaya ang boses ng mga katutubong pamayanan ay maaaring maging balon ng karunungan para sa buong bansa. At ganun na, sa ganung paraan, mas nakikilala natin kung sino tayo bilang mga Pilipino.
As shared in the video earlier, the Indigenous Peoples Education Program is the response of the department to the right of Indigenous peoples and communities to basic education that is responsive to their context, respects their identities, promotes their indigenous knowledge, competencies, and their other aspects of their cultural heritage. This responsiveness of the department is born from 2 decades of growing openness and the development of the language and perspective of inclusion and the language and perspective of rights. This is reflected in DO 62, where it is explicitly stated that this program subscribes to the rights-based approach, and it gives primary importance to 3 principles. These are the principles of inclusion, participation, and empowerment. The journey of the Indigenous Peoples Education Program went through several milestones. And the first milestone has to do with how the department recognized that it has contributed to the degree of discrimination and marginalization being experienced by IP communities. This was shared by Brother Armin Luistro during the signing of the DepEd order, where he says that this DepEd order recognizes the faults of the past. It is also an invitation for us to change our perspective, the lens that we usually use to view reality, and to change it with a perspective that allows us to be truly inclusive. So this recognition of the faults of the past is a critical aspect of what we can say as healing and reconciliation. If we are to effectively move onward, there is a need for that recognition that something has happened and something has to move towards change. And so he says further, the DepEd order, the O62, is an invitation for us to learn with, not just learn about, the indigenous communities who are usually marginalized. So this idea of growing or moving to a change in perspective is inherent to the Indigenous Peoples Education Program. In the IPED program, we are hoping to advocate for inclusive perspective, inclusive policy, and inclusive practice in terms of how our programs or initiatives interact with indigenous communities. So we can image it as the Indigenous Peoples Education Program interacting or permeating the different aspects of the education system. It can be the curriculum, access concerns, governance, and learning environment. We are hoping that with the Indigenous Peoples Education Program, the department will contribute to the development of learners who are rooted in their culture, indigenous knowledge systems and practices, and their ancestral domain. It is also being articulated by communities that hopefully through IPED, learners will grow up with a clear sense of identity. They will be committed to face issues of the community using the education that they have gained. They can also assert self-determination with the community, and they are conscious of being inheritors of a heritage and becoming an elder for the next generations. From the very beginning, during the dialogue between DepEd and IP communities, elders and leaders have accented or have communicated that education for them is not just about access. Ang sabi nila, kahit daw makarating ang mga paaralan, ang mga guro, ang mga libro, kung ang mangyayari lang po ay diskriminasyon at mababa pa rin ang tingin sa mga katutubo, hindi daw po ito edukasyon. And therefore, in the IPED program, access and quality are intertwined. And in this way, it is strongly aligned to our call for edukalidad, where quality defines access. And in the IPED program, that points to a culture-responsive education. So it is not enough that education is there or reaches indigenous communities. It has to come with a certain quality, and that quality is it should be culture-responsive. Again, this is articulated in DO62. The policy statements in DO62 are of 7 areas that would be access, pedagogy, content and assessment, learning resources and environment, hiring, deployment and development of teachers, institutional support for IPED, linkage building, and eradication of discrimination. Operationally, especially at the field level, edukalidad in the context of IPED will mean synergistic involvement or complementation of both curriculum and governance. Since in IP education, concerns are not only within the ambit of curriculum, but also in the arena of governance. Again, part of the milestones of the Indigenous Peoples Education Program would be the institutionalizing of dialogue between DepEd and our IP communities. So this was one of the key foundations that was needed. And this dialogue is crucial because it allows communities with DepEd at the local level to really come up with local plans, local understanding of the context, which cannot be done at the national level. So while we have the O62 at the national level, providing national long-term directions and perspective and policy views, at the local level, where implementation of the IPED program is to be done, there is a need for a process of dialogue and a coming together of understandings. And this is done through what we call the IPED framework. The IPED framework is like a local DO62 of sorts, where the division and the communities come together and try to discuss and see how DO62 will look like or will be realized at the division level. In the process, it is necessary for the department to recognize the customary governance structures of indigenous communities. That means to recognize and work with the leaders of IP communities and their governance structures, because indigenous cultural communities have their governance structures. So again, this is an important milestone for the department. All over the country, different indigenous communities have customary governance structures, and through the years, our field offices have learned to interact with them and to know them and come up with local plans. The process of this dialogue allows DepEd and the communities to come together for what we call the free, prior, and informed consent process. The Indigenous Peoples Rights Act mandates that all government agencies, all entities that want to work with Indigenous peoples communities have to go through the free, prior, and informed consent process to ensure that communities really participate effectively and are given the right, they are able to exercise their right to make decisions for their future and for their community. The dialogue process also allows for participatory program planning, budgeting, implementation, and assessment. So this is an example of a dialogue process that is happening. And when we implement this important milestone, and this is an ongoing milestone, we are supporting and promoting the right of IP communities to self-governance and empowerment, which is in the Indigenous Peoples Rights Act. The next important milestone that the program went through in the early years was the conduct of mapping and baseline establishment. So after having the dialogue with the local communities, with local representatives and leaders, and explaining to them about the IPED program, and with their consent that we continue on with the process, we went through mapping and baseline because we had to first know who are the indigenous peoples at the division level, where are the IP learners. And this took time also. And in the process, we were able to have several enhancements, especially in our basic education information system. So for example, we were able to update the accuracy of our ethnicity data. We have advocated for the administrative order of what is now the PSA when it comes to the naming of learners, because they have an administrative order that provides guidance in terms of the naming of learners, respecting the names of different cultural groups in the country, particularly indigenous peoples. We also have included in the BEIS indigenous religion to recognize that we have communities that practice their own belief systems. We have also updated the list of languages in the list so that we account for the different languages that are there and hopefully include them in our mother tongue-based multilingual education initiative. Another important milestone of the IPED program was the capacity building of our DepEd personnel. So in the early years, there was a lot of capacity building, and that continues until today. And we are hoping that through our capacity building activities, we are able to shift perspectives and grow into transcending our prejudices. Capacity building had also to be done with our community counterparts. For them, it was a process of enabling them to effectively participate in decision making and in our discussions, let's say, on curriculum contextualization or the development of learning resources. They felt they needed these also, and in fact called our attention. That's why we also developed capacity building activities with them. The next important milestone would be the release of policies that would promote the respect for Indigenous peoples' culture, like DO 51 series of 2014, that looks into the conduct and use of materials. Whenever we have activities where we will use IP materials, or we will come up with articles about Indigenous communities, or there will be activities where we request Indigenous communities or learners, let's say, to share their dances, their songs, their chants, let's say, or their materials. This is the DepEd order that guides us. It hopes to uphold the dignity and cultural integrity of Indigenous cultural communities, promote intercultural understanding, and protect the educational purpose of these activities that we do. Another important DepEd order or set of DepEd orders that have been released has to do with the allocation and utilization of our program support fund. Again, because the IPED program needs to be implemented at the local level, we have these DepEd orders that ensure that our funds are flexible. The guidelines are flexible enough to allow local planning, including budgeting. But of course, they are guided. No? They are guided by what common objectives or themes we have for the year, or the directions that we are all contributing to. So through these DepEd orders, we recognize the diversity of the situations of IP communities, support local planning and implementation, guided by national directions and objectives. Another important policy that came out was the Indigenous Peoples Education Curriculum Framework. So this one, again, it promotes and upholds the dignity and cultural integrity of IP communities. It provides guidance for the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge systems and practices in the national education system. Also the interface, how to interface our IKSPs with the national curriculum, and the use of local language. So these milestones provided basis for us to move now into curriculum contextualization, where the main output is the contextualized lesson plans that are used in school. So if we are to initially summarize the first 4 years of the IPED program, we will see that we started with laying solid program foundations, then preparing for systematic implementation, and also the preparation of our schools for school level implementation. So by school year 2017 to 2018, it was now possible to move into school and community level implementation of the IPED program. Given all these earlier milestones, it was now possible for our IP learners at the school level to experience what we call culture responsive education. Given that contextualized lesson plans were developed by our teachers and school heads in schools implementing the IPED program, they were able to experience culture-based lessons that would be according to their own specific cultures and contexts. This included also the development of local materials in the language of the learners. Of course, before we can develop local materials, there is a need to also look into the community's orthography, how they spell their words. So these prerequisites to mother tongue-based multilingual education is also being prepared by the divisions in partnership with our IP communities. As part of the teaching learning process, we are also looking at how our elders can be part of the classes as teachers and mentors. So this is another milestone for us. So in different parts of the country, as appropriate and as agreed upon with the community counterparts, there may be some lessons on some days where there were elders or culture bearers who tackle particular cultural aspects, no, that are part of the lesson. Join the teacher. They are partners with the teacher in tackling the lesson. Also, part of the contextualization of lessons is how the wider community becomes the bigger classroom. Sa katutubong pananaw po kasi, ang lupaing ninuno ang tinuturing na classroom. And this is really part of the growing process of IP learners, that learning happens anywhere actually. So one of the things that we are encouraging in the IPED program is how to maximize the wider ancestral domain, including the activities that are happening, the seasons of the year, for example. How can this be part of the contextualized lesson plans and part of the teaching learning process? Another expression of contextualization is how, in some areas, senior high offerings have been developed in relation to the cultural practices and the cultural artistic expressions of the community. So one example, for example, is at Bolis Senior High School in South Cotabato. They have developed a senior high offering that looks, let's say, into brass casting and weaving. So this is another expression of how our national system is being culturally responsive in the context of IP communities. Important for culture responsive education to be effective is for us to have teachers who know the language and the culture themselves, especially for K-3 because of the language component. And so in 2016, the department released DO 50 for the hiring of teachers for Teacher 1 in schools implementing the IPED program. So again, we need to ensure that the appropriate teachers are hired given the needs of our IP communities. Of course, another important dimension we are looking into is the delivery of facilities. So while this is shared as the 9th milestone, it doesn't mean it is the 9th or the last. Rather, it is an ongoing process, but the other milestones provide insights in terms of the kind of facilities that are needed. So for example, the discussion on curriculum, the dialogue with the elders, all these are necessary so that we are able to design appropriate facilities for IPED implementation. By undertaking these milestones, we are also promoting the right to cultural integrity and the right to social justice and human rights of IP communities. Again, these two rights are elaborated in the Indigenous Peoples Rights Act. Putting all that together, we are, as a department, contributing to the right to ancestral domains of IP communities because we are hoping that the education that the learners undergo will enable them to be active participants in the development of their ancestral domains. So right now, what is the program reach of the department, or at least pre-pandemic? Ano po ba ang naabot ng IPED program? The IPED program is in 16 regions. In 120 divisions, we have around 3,500 schools with dominantly IP learners using contextualized lesson plans. These are the IPED implementing schools. It reaches around 128,500 IP learners. And so far, we have around 2,177 teachers who were hired using DO 50, and most of them are IPs themselves. Also in the pipeline are around 90 languages for inclusion in the MTB-MLE initiative. Perhaps another way for us to appreciate the reach of the IPED program is through our enrollment data. So when we look at our enrollment data over, let's say, the past 11 years. So from 2008 to from school year 2008-2009 up to school year 2019-2020, we will notice that there is a sudden leap in enrollment, particularly between school year 2014-2015 and school year 2015-2016. Practically 110 po ang increase ng IP learners based sa BEIS. Now, of course, we might be asking, paano yun nangyari? Did suddenly from 1.2 million po, naging 2.4 million po kasi. So would that mean that 1 million learners suddenly flocked to DepEd? Reflecting on that and also gathering information and feedback from our personnel, it seems that in the earlier 2 years of the IPED program, from school year 2013-2014 and then 2014-2015, there was a momentum of understanding of who IPs are, how do we get to what would be the appropriate way, for example, of discussing with them about their ethnicity so that they are willing to share about their ethnic identity. Also, communities were saying that the openness, they felt the openness of DepEd personnel when it comes to engaging IP communities, and somehow that openness among our personnel in DepEd and the dialogue mechanisms made it possible for more IP learners, maybe, and even the parents to be open to share about their ethnicity, and therefore it registers now in our enrollment data. So if we look now at our enrollment data, we have around 2.5 million IP learners starting school year 2016-17, and that has continued until school year 2019-2020. Again, we see that this is an important reach of the IPED program, and we are hoping that together we can continue with this trend. So what else? How else do we feel the IPED program? So when we ask communities, for example, they say that they really feel their partnership and their participation in IPED initiatives. They also sense the respect for cultural identity now compared to before. We also have seen how more DepEd personnel are learning to unlearn derogatory views about Indigenous peoples, and there really is an increased respect and understanding for cultural diversity. The program reach described earlier may also be appreciated as the initial gains of the IPED program over the past 9 years. Now we are confronted with a pandemic crisis. So if we look at the progression of a program development, of how the program is growing, last year would have been an opportunity for program review and other related activities so that we can have a sense of what have been done, what are the details of the gains at the division and regional level leading to national consolidation, so that we will be able to see the trends and patterns and be able to project moving forward. However, with the pandemic, we have had to take stock and reflect on what needs to be done. How are we to engage the pandemic? Sabi po ng mga community elders ng pamayanang taubuhid ng Occidental Mindoro, pag tayo ay humaharap sa mga hamon, humaharap sa mga parang balakid, lalo na sa usaping pangkaunlaran, ang sabi po nila, huwag ninyong talikuran, harapin ninyo hanggat sumisikat pa ang araw. Paano nga ba haharapin ang isang malawakang krisis na walang kasiguraduhan, na hindi natin kabisado o kontrolado o naghahasik ng pag-aalinlangan at takot? Paano natin ipagpapatuloy ang pagtataguyod ng IPED program sa gitna ng krisis? These were some of the reflections of the program implementers, especially in the early months of the pandemic. And because of this, it was decided that the theme for the celebration of our Indigenous Peoples Month as a department will revolve around these reflections. The theme at the time was hamon ng pandemya ating harapin, gabay ang katutubong karunungan at giti. Ano nga po ba ang sinasabi ng katutubong karunungan sa gitna ng ganitong sitwasyon? Ang isang mahalaga po ay paano natin haharapin o paano natin susuriin ang kinakaharap. We need to listen to the signs of the times. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? After taking time to touch base with our community partners, these were the challenges, the major challenges that emerged last year. One was increased late enrollment. More wanted to enroll later. Families shared that they need assistance in the teaching learning process. Parents were saying that they did not have the needed exposure to schooling that their own children would need. So their grade level, for example, may have been lower as compared to their children's today. Adults also were saying, the parents also were saying that they need to work to sustain their families. Another challenge that faced us was some families moved to more interior areas that are far from government services, including our schools. For the demands needed to implement the distance learning modalities, many of our schools, many of our IPED implementing schools lack the needed equipment and supply. So these were some of the challenges. However, we also noticed that there were emerging opportunities. One was the international call for equity. It was being pushed by both international and local bodies that marginalized groups should definitely be part of plans and should be in the radar. This was further reinforced by our basic education learning continuity plan, which included equity in one of its objectives. We also see the appreciation of the community and family as the setting for learning, which is also being advocated by the IPED program. In the indigenous knowledges, especially when it comes to health, are regaining more attention and understanding, particularly during this pandemic. School community partnerships are also being strengthened because now the communities really are the arenas of teaching and learning. Innovations are also being explored, which some of them may be useful in the long term for our IP communities. While we are able to see these challenges and opportunities, there is still that sense that it is difficult to forge a path. Ang hirap pa rin. Yun nga po, there is no blueprint for this situation. Ngunit, kahit ang daan ay hindi man nakikita, ang pangarap po ay nasa diwa. So it is important po for us, in a situation like this, to touch base. Ano nga ba yung pangarap? Halimbawa sa IPED, ano nga ba ang pangarap? So ito, nasa sitwasyon tayo na hindi natin nakikita kung ano ang daan natin. Ngunit, ang pagbalik sa ano ang pangarap ay maaaring makatulong upang makapagbukas po tayo ng bagong daan. And so, it is crucial therefore to reflect, ano nga ba ang mga naabot natin? Where are we in the IPED journey? And this was shared earlier. This was what we had to do together last year. And based on that, one of the convictions that emerged was kailangang ipagtanggol at alagaan ang mga napagsikapan. So recognizing that these are the milestones, these are the initial gains, we need to protect and to care for these initial gains and milestones. Definitely, we are to ensure that all schools implementing IPED are to be sustained. So it became clear to us that this is the priority because IPED is alive at the school level, at the community level. So what do we need to do to support that? First, we will have to sustain dialogue with community partners. Second, we have to develop culturally appropriate psychosocial support processes and materials. Third, program funds will have to prioritize support to school-level IPED implementation. Fourth, we need to set up mechanisms to monitor and provide technical assistance for school-level implementation. We will continue with the program review only in a different way, and we hope to evolve education innovations that will be responsive to the context of IP communities. Another realization that came to us is this. Ang daan ay hindi man nakikita, ngunit ang matuto habang naglalakbay ay patuloy na biyaya. So in a situation where uncertainty is there and we have to forge a pioneering path, there is no way to go but to learn along the way. And it is this stance, I think, that has made it possible for us to do what had to be done last school year. We had to learn different ways. Ano po? We had to move forward. At yun na po, kailangang maging mapagmalay at isulong ang mga mapagpanibagong pamamaraan. So this stance among our IPED implementers made it possible now to respond to the needs of our communities. 75 to 80% of our IPED implementing schools went purely modular. And so we had to learn and we had to do what was needed to come up with modular materials. 20 to 25% were able to use radio-based instruction, TV-based instruction, offline digital and audio lessons. So we see an example, the use of the walkie-talkie as an intervention. We also have around less than 1% of schools who have learners who were online. So this one, I think, was dominantly experienced, let's say, in the Cordillera Administrative Region, and perhaps a few of the city divisions where perhaps some IP learners were able to experience online learning. Our IPED implementing divisions also had to do contextualization of lessons, this time the SLMs. It was also necessary for them to support parents and other adults in the community so that they can assist learners. An important step taken by the department was the hiring of learning support aides, which was very necessary for our IPED implementing schools. Around 55% of our IPED implementing schools hired learning support aides, and we reached around 1,642 LSAs, at least, no? 1,642 LSAs who served in 891 schools. We also made sure that additional program support funds were channeled to the division so that our implementing schools could have additional resources to implement the IPED program in these different distance learning modalities. So in the beginning or before the school year started, since we started in October, the enrollment was about 83% of the previous school year's enrollment. But by January 2021, enrollment of IP learners increased to 98.49% of the previous school year. That is 2.5 million IP learners reached. And we would like to take this opportunity to thank all our implementing regions and divisions for making this possible. As we can see, our efforts have reached out to at least 98% of our learners. We recognize that we have something like 1.5 learners to find, so to speak. But this alone is already a major feat, considering all the challenges and difficulties that we are aware of when it comes to the situation of our IP communities. Maraming salamat po sa buong departamento sa mga naisagawa natin upang maabot po ito para sa ating mga IP learners and IP communities. So again, as we can see, last year, we have been able to carry out our call na ating ipagtanggol at alagaan ang napagsikapan at maging mapagmalay at isulong ang mga mapagpanibagong paraan. Let us now listen to the experience and journey of two divisions whose initiatives may in a way represent the different ways by which our implementing divisions implemented their initiatives last school year.
The Division of Palawan on its commitment and advocacy to deliver quality education services, which embrace our flagship program, Maaasahan, an exact personification that highlights harmonious relationships among internal and external stakeholders and strengthens the connection and collaboration of education partners in mobilizing resources to support the programs and projects, particularly IP education of the division. Presenting the Indigenous Peoples Education Implementation Updates. Palawan has identified 10 indigenous cultural communities. Magbog, Palawan, Taot Bato, Kaanay, Tagbanwa Mainland, Cagayanan, Batak, Cuyunon, Agutaynan, and Tagbanwa Calamian. There are 15 districts with 98 elementary and 9 secondary IPED implementing schools for school year 2020-2021 for the number of districts and schools serving indigenous cultural communities or IP learners. Out of 15 districts, there are a total of 694 DepEd personnel serving ICCs or IP learners for school year 2020-2021. For IPED implementing schools, there are 10,446 enrolled IP learners in 107 IPED implementing schools, or 80.9% from the total enrollment this school year 2020-2021. Regarding IP learning resources, there are 76 short stories in small books of Calamian Tagbanwa, Tagbanwa Mainland, Mulbog, Cuyunon, Palawan, and Cagayanan. There are also 4 short story big books of Cuyunon. Our learning resources are Cuyunon Orthography and Primer, Calamian Tagbanwa Orthography. There are ongoing orthography development of Batak, Agutaynan, and Palawan, and ongoing development of contextualized radio scripts. Here is the development and validation of Tagbanwa Orthography for curriculum and learning resources in school year 2020-2021. For radio-based instruction, there are 43 IPED implementing schools who are RBI recipients. Likewise, 4 IPED implementing schools are using walkie-talkie as means of communication during learning delivery.
Tanong mo, sagot agad.
And contextualized learning materials, here is a sample using a localized radio scripts for kindergarten and an activity sheet for kindergarten, Calamian Tagbanwa. The division has also conceptualized a Palawan short stories
and script writings as part of their daily lessons.
Sample developed supplementary reading materials, virtual or online planning, monitoring and evaluation, or program implementation review, and the IPED virtual retooling and orientation for Kumustahan sa IPED program. And of course, the Basic Education Learning Continuity Plan of IPED for school year 2021-2022 is anchored to its umbrella project called Project PRIZE, promoting rights-based initiatives and approaches through continuous collaboration and engagement. Thank you so much and God bless us all.
Hindi pa man tuluyang sumisilip si Haring Araw, gising na ang mga bata at magulang sa sitio Puting Bato. Malamig pa ang tubig, naliligo na ang grade 2 learner na si Ren Carl, habang ang kanyang ina ay naghahanda ng pagkain. Aligaga na ang mag-anak sa pagayak dahil sa araw na ito ay magsisimula ng muli si Ren Carl sa kanyang pag-aaral. Ngunit taliwas sa nakasanayan, hindi papasok si Ren Carl sa kanyang paaralang Kalay IP School. Dito lang siya sa loob ng kanilang tahanan mag-aaral at ang kanyang ina ang magsisilbi niyang gabay. Hindi pa pinapayagan ang face-to-face classes dahil sa panganib at pangambang dulot ng COVID-19. Kung kaya distance learning lamang ang maaaring gamiting pamamaraan sa pagtuturo. Isa lang ang sitio Puting Bato sa maraming komunidad sa Sarangani na walang signal at access sa internet. Kaya't sa mga learning modalities na inihahain ng DepEd, tanging modular distance learning lamang ang angkop para sa mga mag-aaral dito. Subalit, may nakikitang iilang konsiderasyon ang DepEd Sarangani sa pagpapatupad ng modular distance learning sa mga komunidad.
Marami tayong mga magulang ang hindi nakapag-aral. So ano ang ituturo nila sa kanilang mga anak? Hindi ito environment friendly dahil gagamit tayo ng napakaraming papel at ink sa paggawa ng module.
Kaya isang inobasyon ang nabuo ng Information Technology Officer ng DepEd Sarangani na si Roy Detoyato, katulong ang iba pang mga kawani. Ito ang sagot sa problema sa kawalan ng signal at internet connection sa probinsya at nakikitang mas mainam na alternatibo sa modular distance learning. Ito ang LR on Wheels o Learning Resources on Wi-Fi Hub for expanded e-learning in Sarangani.
Mas nakakatipid kami kasi lahat ng self-learning modules and video lessons ay accessible na sa LR on Wheels.
Gamit ang intranet technology, magtatayo ng mga access point antenna sa mga komunidad kung saan maaaring ikonekta ng mga mag-aaral ang kanilang mga gadget katulad ng smartphones, tablets at laptops. Ayon kasi sa survey, nasa 30% ng mga mag-aaral ay may gadget ngunit walang internet connection. Sila ang prioridad na makakatanggap ng serbisyo ng LR on Wheels. Ang mga mag-aaral ay may oportunidad na matuto sa modernong pamamaraan. Hindi lamang pala ang mga nasa syudad ang may access sa e-learning. Pati ang mga mag-aaral sa mga liblib na sityo ay maaaring matuto gamit ang teknolohiyang sa syudad lamang karaniwang nararanasan.
Sa paghahanda ng mga learning materials, una naming ginawa ay ang pag-contextualize ng mga aralin sa konteksto ng blaan. Pagkatapos makumpleto ang mga materials, in-upload na namin sa aming mga klase sa loob ng LR on Wheels. Nag-conduct din kami ng orientation sa parents upang magabayan nila ang kanilang mga anak.
Sa LR on Wheels, makakapag-aral ang mga kabataan sa pamamagitan ng video lessons at interactive activities na hindi posible sa printed modules. Maaari ring mag-chat ang mga bata sa kanilang teacher kung mayroon silang hindi nauunawaan sa leksyon. Ang mararanasan ng mga kabataan sa LR on Wheels ay katulad ng sa online distance learning. Ang kaibahan, ang LR on Wheels ay hindi konektado sa internet. Local area network lamang ito, kaya hindi maaaring mag-access ng social media accounts o online games ang mga bata. Ang teknolohiyang ito ay magagamit lamang ng mga mag-aaral sa kanilang pagkatuto.
In real time na monitor natin ang ating mga guro at ang activity na ibibigay nila sa kanilang mga learners.
Suportado naman ng lokal na pamahalaan ng Sarangani, mga munisipyo at maging ng mga barangay ang programa.
We commit to support dahil naniniwala tayo na sa pamamagitan ng edukasyon ay mabibigyan natin sila ng magandang kinabukasan.
This LR on Wheels project is a very strong example of the Department of Education, communities and the private sector working together to continue the education of our children.
Ang investment sa LR on Wheels ay hindi lamang magagamit ngayong may pandemic, maging sa panahong papayagan na ang face-to-face classes. Maaari pa rin itong gamitin upang patuloy na matuto ang mga kabataan sa pamamaraang blended learning.
Pinaghahandaan na po natin ng sangay ng Sarangani ang pagpapatupad ng programang ito sa darating na pasukan. Nais kong pasalamatan bilang tagapamanihala ng sangay ng Sarangani ang ating mga lokal na pamahalaan sa kanilang ipinakita na suporta sa ating programa na LR on Wheels.
Sa Sarangani, hindi lamang ipinagpapatuloy ang edukasyon, kundi mas lalong pinagbuti ito dahil sa pagtutulungan ng DepEd Sarangani at mga partner nito. Magiging posible na ang e-learning para kay Ren Carl at sa mga kapwa niya mag-aaral sa sitio Puting Bato at maging sa iba pang kaparehong komunidad sa lalawigan. Patunay ito na kapag nagkakaisa ang mga sektor ng lipunan, magandang kinabukasan ang naghihintay para sa mga kabataan.
Muli, maraming salamat po sa ating field offices for all the initiatives, the innovations that we have done to enable us to see through last school year. Now we are into our second school year in the pandemic context, and this time our call continues. For school year 2021 to 2022, this year is a special year for the IPED program. First, it is the 10th year anniversary of Department Order 62 Series of 2011, which gave birth to the Indigenous Peoples Education Program. At the same time, nationally, we are having our quincentennial commemorations, and this year, it has been declared as the Year of Pre-Colonial Ancestors from July 2021 to August 2022. And if we try to reflect on what we are celebrating during our quincentennial commemorations, we will realize that our indigenous communities are the contemporary voices of our pre-colonial memories and wisdom. Sila po ang nagsasabuhay at buhay na ehemplo, buhay na katibayan ng tapang at giting ng ating mga ninuno. Collectively, they embody the intergenerational courage and commitment to community well-being. So this time, for our IP month, our theme is Karunungan ng mga katutubong pamayanan, 500 taon ng pagtatanggol at pagpapayabong, ipagpatuloy sa pangalawang dekada ng katutubong edukasyon. So again, we are celebrating this year not only the 10th year anniversary of the IPED program, but symbolically we are remembering that we will not have our 10th year celebration or first decade of the IPED program, if not for the 500 years of continuing commitment and courage of our IP communities to assert who they are, their cultures, their knowledge systems, and their wisdom. So this year is a special year for us because it allows us to remember the intergenerational connectedness of what we are experiencing today. The indigenous knowledges that are here today are related to these 500 years of history. We continue to ensure that all schools implementing IPED are sustained. Additional program support funds are to be downloaded or have been downloaded to our divisions to ensure learning continuity. We will continue the contextualization of learning resources and COVID IEC materials. We are moving into the orientation of new teachers and school heads assigned in IP communities. And we hope to enhance the learning delivery modalities that have been implemented in the previous school year. So if we now look at our summary, we are seeing that while we recognize and embrace the pandemic, we continue into our second decade, having our program review and protecting our community well-being and promoting educational innovations. We would like now to share also a short video of an effort in a division that is an illustration of how they are building on their initiatives of the previous school year.
Ang sangay ng Romblon kasama ang mga katutubong pamayanan ng Sibuyan Mangyan Tagabukid ay patuloy na sumusuporta upang maitaguyod ang edukasyon sa kabila ng pandemya. Ginamit na bihikulo ang two-way radio upang magkaroon ng komunikasyon na siyang nagdurugtong mula sa paaralan patungo sa katutubong pamayanan. Kalakip nito ang Project Timely na naglalayong ipaunawa sa mga katutubong mag-aaral ng edukasyon at pagkatuto ay magkakaugnay sa lahat ng asignatura. Sa gitna ng pandemya na ating kinakaharap, patuloy ang mga katutubong kabataan at pamayanan na nangangarap. At ituloy ang edukasyon sa new normal na sitwasyon.
So as we move into our second decade, we see that it will be very crucial for everyone to be willing to learn, unlearn, and to experiment, to try different ways of doing things. This is the only way that we can carry out our commitment to protect community well-being and promote educational innovations. So moving onward, given all the challenges we are seeing, we are guided not so much by things to do, but perhaps more of a disposition of how we are going to do things. Gaya ng sinasabi po nito, ang mataimtim na ipinunla ay magbubunga ng mapagpanibagong pag-asa. We are sowing innovations, efforts that we are not sure how it will turn out to be. But one thing for sure, if we are clear about our intentions, if we do it with clarity of planning, there's a bigger chance that it will give birth to things that will be for the good of our learners and our communities. We continue to protect the well-being of our communities and promote education innovations for this next school year. And it will mean, rather for the coming decade, and there are things that we see that are giving us direction for how to move onward. So one is to promote community knowledges that are responsive and relevant to the pandemic and its impact. So we recognize the long-term impact of the pandemic, and our education will have to be relevant in relation to those realities. So examples could probably be the rural farm schools and somehow the incorporation of the indigenous health systems in the contextualization process. Another long-term development that we see that the IPED program can link to is the call of UNESCO that all curricula are to have education for sustainable development as its core by 2025. The theme of sustainable development, education for sustainable development, is also in DO 62. And given the recent things happening, climate change, then perhaps this is one area which the IPED program can connect to and can contribute to. And so, moving onward, we continue with our journey of solidarity with indigenous communities so that together we are able to care for our IP learners as they grow into the future. Sana po ay patuloy na nakaugat ang ating mga isinasagawa sa kanilang mga adhikain, sa kanilang mga pangarap para sa kanilang pamayanan at sa kanilang mga mag-aaral. Sa ating pagpapatuloy, sana po ay walang bibitiw, sama-sama, tulong-tulong sa pagsulong ng katutubong edukasyon. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you so much, Miss Maria Lourie Victor, for a very comprehensive and engaging presentation. Although the program has just begun 10 years ago, we have seen tremendous changes and positive impact of the Indigenous Peoples Education Program to the Filipinos. This is a living testimony that here in the Department of Education, we value every human right and we want everyone to have an access to a quality, culture-based, and complete basic education. So once again, thank you so much, Miss Maria Lourie Victor. So it has been our habit to ask our viewers to share your insights here on DepEd Teaches comment section. You may also post your learnings to this episode on your social media accounts, like your Facebook personal page or Twitter account. You have probably memorized this already, but we just want to say it again. Don't forget to use the hashtag I support DepEd Teaches, and hashtag DepEd Teaches episode 38.
Thank you so much once again for being with us today and completing all the episodes under the theme Hindsight, Insight, Foresight, Lessons and Ways Forward. We hope your new learning will inspire us to improve and move forward in delivering quality instruction. So to our viewers, don't forget to answer and pass our short evaluation. You can scan the QR code or click the link tinyurl.com/DepEdTeachesEval35-38. Don't worry, the questions are easy. If you've watched all the episodes from 35 up to today's episode, you'll be able to pass the evaluation. I am confident that you will get these two certificates, the Certificate of Participation and Appearance. So once again, we hope your Thursday afternoon was another time well spent with us. This wraps up the last episode for the theme, Hindsight, Insight, and Foresight, Lessons and Ways Forward.
See us again on the next episodes of DepEd Teaches. On behalf of the curriculum and instruction strand, let us all give our best in fulfilling our duties and responsibilities. For education is the passport to the future, and for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare today. Hence, our mission here on DepEd Teaches, we will always be empowering teachers, enabling learners. Happy Thursday, everyone.